see you're working on this piece.
Yes, I'm just doing a final variation of your piece, and wondering how to deal with this sort of cadenza-like passage.
Yes, this one is very intense. This is a very intense variation.
Even though it's soft.
Right. And it's quite broad and very sonorous, and it ends the way it ends just should, gradually just disappear.
Okay, well, maybe we can try it.
Maybe we can try it, yes.
One thing I always wanted to know about this piece, Violet, did you write more variations than just the 8 that are here, or did you just write these?
No, I didn't write any others. I just wrote these progressively as they appear in the copy that you have there in front of you.
I wondered because the first variation seems just like a simple figural variation of the theme, but then already in the second variation it's much more extreme. It's very far from the theme already, and that continues throughout the rest of the piece.
That's true. But the fact is that I was, in a way, thinking traditionally, almost, because the tune is very traditional, you see. And when I did my first variation, I was trying to ease myself in gently, without being too dissonant and too far away from the original theme. You see, the way it starts there. It's extremely traditional, and I have been guided very much in my approach to doing this particular piece to Bartók's approach to treatment of Hungarian folk songs.
So you start off with a simple figural variation, but then this one already just uses certain little motives.
Yes, just little motives. And throughout the piece, in each variation, there is some aspect, some little fragment of the theme, particularly, starting right from the beginning, the first few notes, and then moving further into the tune, you see.
With each variation almost.
And of course,
so the first one is less a variation on the structure than a variation on this idea.
Exactly right, yes. And of course, my harmonization of the theme is really very traditional. And deliberately so. I wanted it to be that way because I didn't like to destroy the character of this theme, which I think is...
sounds very innocent and folk song-like.
Yes, and it's supposed to be that way. I would like it to be that way. Just not to make it pretentious, and each variation as it continues onward, as for instance, after the second variation, then I start doing something quite different with figuration, rhythmic figuration.
Well, this is already very different.
Yes. Looking at Canada as a whole now, I'm not pointing to specific localities, but as a whole, in our country, the composer of classical music, as opposed to jazz, does not have a real image, The great public just subconsciously thinks of the composer as being someone out of a book who is not part of our society, really. And though we are better in a sense than, better placed than we were, say, 25 years ago. It is thanks to the Canadian Music Centre, which is doing such a colossal job for us. It is, I feel, a very, it's sort of a lifeblood in our country, the Canadian Music Centre. In doing work for us, in bringing us out as people, as real people who are living and are part of society, you see. Other organizations, such as the Canadian League of Composers, has done a lot for us. The two performing rights organizations, PRO Canada and CABAC, are doing quite a lot. But I think that the center is doing really, practically, in a practical way, is doing the most for us. Because making music available, our music available to any interested person, that is a great thing. Only 16 years to go to the 21st century. And I keep saying to people, look, the 20th century is almost ending, especially to our, I say to conductors, when are you going to bring out more of our music? Because we're almost in the 21st century, and we've got all this big backlog of music in the 20th century. Not only Canadian, but of every country, you know what I mean? There's such a mass of stuff written. You know, when you start to think of it, you can go through the repertoire of all the 20th century composers who are in encyclopedias. And then you begin to think, wow, we've got a long way to go yet.
I got to know Violet Archer actually in 1979, although I never really met her until 1980, because that was when I commissioned a work from her, the second piano sonata. I commissioned it at the time through the Alberta Composers Association, which had some money for commissioning works. With their case, you could be quite specific about the kind of work you wanted. Some commissions are like that, others aren't. I wasn't specific because I wanted to give Dr. Archer the freedom to write whatever she wanted to write. It turned out she wrote a piano sonata. I did insist on a major work as opposed to a little tiny piece. But she wrote a piano sonata for me, which suited me really well, which was remarkable because although, of course, I knew her work as a composer since she's quite well known in the Canadian music scene and has been for many years, she hadn't become too familiar with my work as a pianist and didn't know exactly what to write for me. I remember a phone call where she said, "What do you like?" So I said, "Well, whatever you write," which wasn't very helpful. And then she said, "But technical things, you know, what do you like to do?" I said, "Well, I like octaves." So there's a big octave passage in the second movement of her second piano sonata that might have been the result of that, I don't know. But the commissioning process is really very simple. If you can apply for and find a granting agency to fund the piece, a performer finds a composer that they want a piece from, you apply to the granting agency. Hopefully, if you're successful, you get the money and then you get the work. And in 1979, I was lucky enough to get Violet's second piano sonata. I'd already investigated some of her piano music, but a piece I didn't know at all was the variations on La-Haut, which was a piece which she wrote in 1952. And as far as she knows, I believe, Charles Reiner, who played the premiere, hasn't played it, and no one else has played it since.
Well, I like to feel that that I'm on good terms with performers. That we have something in common, you know what I mean? I'm writing the music and they are performing it. They're making music. So we're both involved in making music. They interpret the music which we write.
About halfway through. And then this gets turned into... almost a completely different idea, but still recognizable.
That's right. Well, it all originates from the pattern of the theme, but here, of course, I wanted a very contrasting mood to the previous variation, which you just played a fragment, the fast-moving one. So this is very tranquil and almost austere, this variation.
Yes.
And then it moves into a very light-hearted one in which a little fragment, the last three notes of the theme become very important. I integrate them, you see. Exactly right. And I carry that all the way through, so that the variation is really built on this.
The last three notes.
The last three notes of the theme. So then, of course, the next one is a little march, and there's a sort of an inversion of turning upside down
Yes,
some of
almost.
the
The theme
notes.
this goes.
And I'm going the other way around, backwards, downwards, instead of upwards. So it's a very light and breezy little march. Now, the next variation, number 7, of course, is very, very intense. And there I use the first couple of notes of the pattern of the first couple of notes of the theme.
Yes.
But I've completely changed tonality. And it moves, well, to use a technical term, canonically. In other words, the left hand starts and then the right hand follows, doing a similar pattern, you know.
But you still actually have the whole theme.
But I do, yes.
It's just very slow.
It's there, yes. It's all there.
Greatly expanded over the original idea.
And of course, the words of the song, it talks about faraway mountains, you see.
I didn't.
Yes, that's
know
what the song is about, how this person longs to see those faraway mountains. So that I have this ascending arch pattern in this. And likewise, in the last variation, I have this steadily mounting pattern.
Well, I always thought, you remember I wrote you a letter asking you
yes.
if you'd seen mountains when you wrote this, and you said you'd never even been near a mountain.
At that time, I hadn't. But I
think it's a very mountainous sort of passage.
Yes, it is. And of course, it's meant to be the climax of the whole piece. It's very brilliant, technically very brilliant. And also there, of course, I do introduce fragments of the theme.
Again, slower.
Again. There. Yes, there. Yes.
I discovered the piece when I was looking for repertoire for my record, Ballade, and I was very pleased to find it. It's the kind of a piece which probably would have been out of fashion in the 1960s. It's not a completely imperceptible piece for the listener. In fact, it's actually quite easy and quite enjoyable to listen to. And while it's a very good piece, and in certain ways a very complex piece once you get to know it, the initial hearing of it is something that's really quite easy for anyone to do. You don't have to be fascinated by or an expert on contemporary music. And of course, lots of pieces written in the 60s especially were written in a style which was so abstruse that only a trained musician could possibly hope to get a handle on it. With the simplification of music now in the 70s and 80s, I think it's possible to reach back and get older pieces which were passé in the 60s, but which now we can look at historically and say, but this is a good piece. So it doesn't have a tremendous quantity of dissonance in every bar, and you don't have to have a doctor's degree in music in order to understand it. Still, it's a very good piece. It's not a trite piece just because it's easier to hear.
I think being a composer is a very exciting vocation, because one is always embarking. Each new project is a challenge. One continually meets different people, different artists. I'm very interested in people. I enjoy people. I don't live in an ivory. I don't feel I'm one of the ivory tower kind of people. I enjoy being with people, and I can derive a lot of pleasure from meeting new people, as well as my other acquaintances. I like visiting new surroundings, to go to countries that I've never been before and seeing how things are over there, you see. And so therefore, my outlook is that I'm not just looking right down in one small circle. I don't go for that kind of an outlook.
Actually, if there's one thing I had to change about the concert scene in Canada, it wouldn't be a thing specific to Canada that I would change. It would be the way international careers are developed. I think there's too much a sense, and I think this is actually less true in Canada than in some other countries, of being two kinds of careers. Either you have an enormously successful career, you're so busy you can't possibly fulfill your contract obligations morally and musically the way you should sometimes, or you have nothing. And I think that it's reasonable if there's a variety of levels of career that are possible. I mean, pick up a copy of Musical America sometime. Every singer, every pianist is a colossal superstar, and Horowitz is and Birgit Nilsson's rival, right? Of course, this is nonsense, but it's necessary to sell oneself in this way to try to have a career, because there seem to be major big careers and then much, much less. I find that a little less true in Canada, and therefore perhaps a little healthier situation.
Well, I've been right across Canada many times, and I've lived both in the East and in the West. Therefore, I have a good, strong view of my country, both visually and practically, we would say. I'm very much influenced by my surroundings, by landscape, by the ruggedness of our landscape, the vastness of the prairies, the very gentle landscape of the townships, by Percé Rock and all that. And it all sort of adds up together, and it contributes to the way I write, I feel, to certain results in my music.
Career opportunities are especially open in Alberta because it's a fairly young province. I've lived and taught here for 12 or 13 years, and when I first came here, although many wonderful things had happened musically and in other ways, it was still a wide open place. I did many premieres and many kinds of programs that hadn't been heard before, or hadn't been heard in years and years before. Also, a place like Calgary gives one a certain opportunity for trying out big repertoire. I remember playing an all Beethoven program, including the Appassionata and Moonlight Sonatas, about 2 years after I came here. That's something I wouldn't do in Toronto, or I would hesitate to do in Toronto. It would have to be exactly the right conditions. So it's easier to have those kinds of opportunities in a place that's culturally perhaps a little more open than major center.